Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ray's Musical Reviews, a segment on the Go Home Heat podcast.
Networks.
Introducing
KP.
And yours truly, Ray, where we talk. Today, we will be talking about the top 10 best albums of 2020. This was a surprisingly good year for music. I'm just going to start off by saying that because everyone has kind of been forced into their homes, it has forced, while a lot of music and albums have been postponed, I think it has allowed more music to shine through this time, and everything was just so consistently good. But the one problem with everything being so consistently good is that it was really hard to make a top 10. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I think we should get into the lists right now, should we?
Dive right in.
No
time to waste.
I will give two honorable mentions. I will give an honorable mention to Logic's No Pressure. That album really surprised me. I will also be giving an honorable mention to Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon 3. It was a pretty good album, but it did not crack the top 10. What do you do? You know?
What do you do? It's only 10 when you're doing 10.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much all I have. Introducing my top 10. If your favorite album doesn't appear on this list, please assume that I didn't listen to it. Number 10 is Clipping, Visions of Bodies Being Burned. This is your horrorcore rap album. Clipping are a horrorcore rap group. This was just some really phenomenally produced, abrasive horrorcore. And that's just kind of all it needed to be, really. Number 9, I will be giving a number 9 spot specifically to Gorillaz, Song Machine Season 1. This is probably the best, this is the best thing they've released since Plastic Beach. I feel like this album specifically does accentuate a lot of the parts of the Gorillaz that I do enjoy, such as the fact that while they still have so many features, they never really lose their personality. And this was just a really good project. The Song Machine has been a great project, even with just the singles. So I shall move on to my number 8 spot, Deftones' Ohms. Yeah, the best metal album of the year, at least to me, or that I've heard. It is kind of a return, especially after Gore and the critical backlash. It wasn't really backlash, it was more like a lukewarm reception that they got to that. And I feel like this is kind of Deftones doing what they do best, which is adding a lot of shoegaze elements and metal elements and making them work seamlessly. That's pretty much all I have to say. Number 7 will be Spanish Love Songs, Brave Faces, everyone. This album has been quite a complicated one, at least to put on my list. There was even a point where it was in my top 3, maybe even my top 1, but then I put it at like number 5, and then I put it at number 10, and then I put it back in my top 3. It was really a difficult place to put this album, but I settled on number 7 because I feel like this album's great. It's really good folk punk with some very passionate vocal performances that really kind of embodies, and this will be a thing with a lot of the albums on my list, a lot of it did kind of embody this awful year even before COVID struck. And I feel like that's a weird little thing to look back on. At number 6, I have The Strokes, The New Abnormal. The Strokes going to with a huge new direction within their musical prowess. Is that the right term? That doesn't. I don't really know the term, but it is a new style, a very much a new style, and this is
a little bit more mature record.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's more almost poppy, right?
Okay.
It's more pop induced. It has a lot more. It's probably top 3 Strokes albums. It's really good. Moving on to number 5, The Weeknd, just After Hours. The production on this thing is immaculate, and that's pretty much all I have to say. It's probably the best thing he's done since House of Balloons. Number 4, Rina Sawayama's Sawayama. One of the best hyperpop albums I've ever heard, just like in general. I feel like a lot of the very creative just samples and song topics really do work here incredibly well and incredibly sufficient. It's such a strange idea to add new metal with hyperpop, and I feel like she takes that idea and makes it shine as much as it could shine, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Number 3, Mac Miller's Circles. Probably the best posthumous album ever released, unless you count David Bowie Black Star. I mean, nothing else really comes to mind. The Prince one was really good, but other than that, this one feels like a complete album. It was a good send-off. Good News is probably my song of the year. It's just so sad. And that's the only reason why it probably wasn't 2 or even 1, was because it was so sad that I had to kind of distance myself from it throughout the year. And that's completely not its fault. But it's just, it's beautiful. Number 2, I have Fiona Apple, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. This album gained traction from being the first album Pitchfork had given a 10 since 2010's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which took 10 years. But I personally don't think this is a 10. It is very, very good. It has so many different ideas, and it's such an interesting album when just to dive down into and to think about. It's just really, really great. It is. And number one might be just specific to me, but I wanted my number 1, I felt like I wanted an album that perfectly personified the year of 2020. And to me, that album is none other than Run the Jewels 4 by Run the Jewels. I think that this album handles all of the political actions, especially that happened during this year, even like before they really, really occurred. And ELP's production may be the most atmospheric and landscape building it's ever been. And Killer Mike is great. I think this album overall will be remembered in history.
You're not the only person that has put those 2 albums at the top of the lists. You know, I mean, both those records are thought of very highly.
Absolutely.
As well they should be.
Yeah. And now that I am done with my personal top 10 albums of 2020, I will now give the floor to KP.
Yes, and Jared is not here today.
No.
For this. He did not make a top 10 list. He had a couple of records that he really liked, and I believe they will both be handled over the course of our top 10s anywho. This is an old guy list. I am willing to admit that right away. I don't have that much time left, big guy. I'm getting up there in age.
What? What are you referencing?
Okay, so number 10, I have Bob Dylan's Rough and Rowdy.
Ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is... I just love this record. It's very... I'm not a huge Dylan guy. I mean, obviously, my whole life he's been there, and he had his moments as the biggest thing in the world, and then he had his moments, or most of my life, he's just been that legend in the distance. And when guys get to that age, that maybe, like you said earlier, actually, he was never a great singer to begin with, so writing his voice in as another instrument...
And I'm not saying he wasn't a great singer. He was a bad singer to dunk on him. I'm not saying that.
I don't think Dylan would say he was a good singer.
No.
But he has a sound, and he was able to, he's been awarded
and he carried that bad singing with incredible songwriting.
Correct. He's been awarded the best songwriter by multiple generations.
Yeah.
And so he utilizes this gift here, and he has some blues romping barroom style songs on this record. He also has a lot of spoken word, gruff stuff here. The lyrics are smart, they're intelligent. He harkens Hamlet and Richard III and Julius Caesar and Macbeth, along with all of our mortality, and it's an amazing accomplishment for a guy this far along in his life to give us something like this when we don't know if we'll get another one. Like, when Cash does the covers album late in his life, you don't know for sure you're going to get something else, and yet he did this really well here. I really love this record. Number 9, Jason Isbell and the 400 Units Reunion, formerly of the Drive-By Truckers. This is a alt country sprawling jam rock record. It covers the concept of addiction thoroughly. Having had my own issues with that, it hits me pretty good. It's haunting in parts. It's sprawling in parts. It reminds me of Kenny Rogers. It reminds me of Tim McGraw. It reminds me of Dire Straits. It's just really well done, and he's hitting a stride as he's branched out on his own and put a couple records under his belt that I find fairly fascinating. And it's a gutsy record to put out there. Number 8, we have King Gizzard and the Lizard Blizzards, KG. This is a band that we know Jared is very fond of, so we'll shout out to him here. I've read some not glowing reviews of this record, but I didn't care. I love it. It has some psychedelia, Middle Eastern parts in there. I find that they cover. It's a really good record.
It's super fun.
Yeah. It's
which is what we need in 2020.
It is, and a lot of what I listen to and that's on this list is not super fun. Like the Dylan record is intelligent and it's smart, and the Isabel record is intelligent and smart, but it's not fun. Chris Stapleton comes in at number 7 for me. With and as I get further in, we get into more political music, which isn't particularly fun either. Although we'll get there. Starting Over by Chris Stapleton. I had a friend a couple of months ago recommend I listen to this. I haven't delved into country music as much as I used to. I think that one thing about my top 10 list is that there are genres that I don't focus on a lot that this year recently I have, and maybe that pushes them to the forefront of my mind because I'm appreciating them more. I don't know, but I know that I really like this record. A couple of rockers on there, but mostly it's the classic country style of R&B that he's able to do with another gruff voice that is really well. He shines on the song Cold and many other tracks on here. Obviously, I think so if it's number 7 for me. But the song Starting Over, the title track, is just a perfect country music song.
Yeah.
And you mentioned my 6 was your one, actually. Run the Jewels, and it is fantastic. It's fantastic. It just, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's a beautiful record. Nas is in at number 5. King's Disease. The 46-year-old Nas returns with. I missed him. I enjoy what he does. I find him to be clever, smart. Again, like you said, he does. Tackle what's going on in the world today. He does it very well. I love hearing Charlie Wilson, who had a guest spot on here. I'm a little bit of an Anderson .Paak mark. The song All Bad I found fantastic, and I really like this record a great deal. In at number 4, and I will be honest with you, my 4, 3, 2, 1s, I switched around in order 3 times this week.
Okay.
So, just being completely honest. At number 4, and a month, at number 4, Bruce Springsteen's Letter to You. This record is crazy. There's a neat story behind it, if you don't mind me telling it quickly. He finds out that his bandmate, George This, is going to pass, and if I mispronounced that name, I apologize, of cancer. He goes to North Carolina. He sits with the man. This would be the last member of his original band, the Castiles, who he played with from 1965 to 68, that is alive. And so when he passes, only Springsteen survives of that band. He gets inspired. He wants to cathartically release some of these emotions, and so he begins to write. He mentions to his keyboard player in the E Street Band, hey, I wrote some music to pay tribute to the scenario and deal with these issues I'm having of being an absentee friend and then the passing of people and my own mortality, my friend's mortality. His keyboard player says, why don't you not finish the songs? Let us come up there and work with you. Get a blueprint for all of them. They go up, they work together, and in 4 days, after 4 days of working together, they record the thing live. And it's beautiful, and I've heard it said that it's dark, and of course our friend at
Revolver Records,
Mr. Elvis, we were there today actually talking to him a little bit. He likes to say that it's dark, but it's not Nebraska dark. But when I listened to it, it didn't feel. I mean, there are parts of it that are almost cheesy, and not in a bad way, but in a life. We're going to get through this whole thing, and it's going to be better. And when he speaks of a heavenly place,
it's a cheesiness, but it's a cheesiness that the world needed.
Right, and it's a land of without. And the E Street Band is fantastic. They've been together now, all my life. They're great, and he does a great job here. And for him, like I said, his original band, 65 to 68. Now here we are in 2020, 2021. And we watched him on Saturday Night Live the other night singing these songs just like on the record. So his stick-to-itiveness power, the staying power of this man is incredible. He's still doing it. Okay. And at number 3, Black Thought's Streams of Thought, Volume 3, Cain and Abel. And again, I read several poor reviews on this, but I don't really care. I found it wonderful. I found it fascinating. I think Black Thought is as good at his job as anybody in the world is at their jobs. And he kills it here. And we have Good Morning featuring Pusha T, Swiss Beats, Killer Mike. That was great. You pointed that out earlier today when we were riding around listening to it. I really liked the tracks that Portugal the Man played on, The Artful Dodger. And I found his social commentary to be fascinating. He used a couple of really well-placed quotes from, or clips of statements by other people in throughout the record. He uses a Dave Chappelle scenario that you've probably seen that's really good. And I thought in this time, he managed to encapsulate his worldview extremely well, along with a couple of songs about relationships and the difficulties that these times bring into that. So I really like this record. Now, in at number 2 was one that I kind of thought would be my number 1 for a long time, but one is just more fun to me, and so I'm going to go with the more fun one over the one that is probably, I like. Okay, Idols Ultramono is my number 2 record, and the Bristol Punks come in with a third album. It is a middle finger in the air.
It's pounding.
It is pounding.
Yeah.
It is pounding.
It's just like the cover.
If you don't like my middle finger in the air, here's some venomous sarcasm to go with it. It reminds me of The Clash. It reminds me of punk. It reminds me of those things that make you want to slam your hand when you're driving down the road, fired up about something, and it is a call to arms. I really love this record. And oddly enough, Kenny Beats, a hip-hop producer, produces this record, and he stated before it came out that the most important band in the world was the Idols. And I don't think that people had thought about it that way, but go ahead.
You could very much argue that they're keeping rock alive.
At least that style of it.
You could very much argue that. At the very least, that style. Like, you could just straight up argue that they're keeping rock just in general.
Punk rock, at least.
Punk rock.
And a lot of what we have qualified as punk rock over the years has lost its venom.
Yeah, they're like pop punk came up. Like,
I call it mall punk, that kind of thing.
It's like pop punk is like you just looked at punk and went, man, what if I wrote like a hook?
Right. Like I said, it's funny too. We'll talk about music in general in a minute. Now we're going to go on to what I believe is the album of the year. And I, again, think I'm probably the only person that does believe that. Goody Mob Survival Kit. I freaking love this record. The Dungeon Family come back with the first track, Are You Ready, has Chuck D on it. Track 4 has Andre 3000 on it, No Cigar, and it is fantastic. Big Boy comes in on track number 5. CeeLo is back with the crew. You have the original guys, and it is social commentary and all of that. However, in contrast to what Nas does on his or what, it is much more like the feeling you get listening to Run the Jewels, in that it's fun. I have a lot of fun listening to this record. There are times when they're being sarcastic, and the beats are it reminds me so much of when, and this is a personal thing and maybe why it jumps to the forefront for me, is it reminds me when the city of Atlanta was like the culture force in music. There was a time when you had Outkast and Goody Mob, and then you had even guys like Elton John and Cher were moving to Atlanta to record. You know what I mean? And then you also had guys like Jermaine Dupri pushing records like from guys like Criss Cross and Usher, and
absolutely
just destroying the path of pop music at that moment in time ran through Atlanta, Georgia.
And absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Especially like specifically on that time period, where rap in the South had been seen as a joke,
Right.
until Outkast came out with their first album,
Yes.
and then everything.
Right.
Changed.
Because Crisscross, to be fair, Crisscross was popular. TLC was popular. When Andre and Big Boy dropped, everything changed. Nothing against those bands.
To your point on Crisscross, though, here's the thing with Crisscross.
They made you jump.
You never really saw them rap about particularly Southern things.
Right.
Like
exactly right.
That's why they got popular.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Outkast were rapping about grits, you know? And that's
Goody Mob too, right?
That's
right.
how they changed that.
And what exactly? Because those bands prior to the Dungeon Family were bands that were recording in Atlanta. The Dungeon Family was Atlanta,
Yes.
being pushed into the forefront of pop culture. And all the things and it's so cool when you hear a rap album and the trumpets and the sounds from high school bands, HBCU bands are in the background, and it makes you bob your head. It makes you move your chest at a different rate than your arms. It is so much fun, and yet it can also carry content that matters, and they managed to do that here, and it hit all the buttons that I need when I'm listening to music. And I just had so much fun listening to this record. And I had a great time this year listening to music. It's funny because when you think about it, they talk about, now that I'm done with my list, you're done with your list, let's talk about music in general a little bit. They say, rock is dead. You had 3 or 4 rock albums that are considered rock albums on your list. Number 2 for me was a rock album. I don't think rock is dead. I think that like all genres of music right now, you got to go search kind of for what you want, but it's all out there.
Well,
it's so easy. It's on your phone, for God's sake.
Rock isn't dead. It's just morphing with other genres.
Right, like you
that
said
Strokes album.
Right,
it's morphing.
Or the pop punk album you're talking about.
Or the Rina Sawayama album.
Correct.
Where it's fusing elements of new metal, and people don't say metal is dead, but metal is a branch of rock, and we're not even gonna get into that. That's a whole different conversation.
Right.
But it forms elements of new metal and stuff.
Metal will never die because people are always gonna be angry.
Absolutely, and also people are gonna always be really snobby.
And those people usually hang out with each other. Yeah, but you had you have all these great, and it's an old guy list, so therefore, to some degree, my list includes some old guys, but you have all these great young hip-hop artists coming around, and that's turning into other items. And then you also had, this year, you had Chuck D and Public Enemy come out with a record. You had Nas come out with a record. You had Busta Rhymes come out with a record. You had Black Thought come out with a record. Goody Mob comes out with a record. If you want to list a hierarchy of great MCs, we just knocked off a bunch of them, right? You know what I mean? And they were all there this year, and they all gave you quality products, even though they weren't in my top 10. Busta can still do it. Chuck D's never going to not be smart.
Rock isn't dead. Hip-hop has just currently, at the moment, overtaken it.
Right.
And rock, who's to say rock in like 5 years isn't going to come back?
Well, another problem with rock, too, is at one time we considered Fleetwood Mac and Aerosmith the same genre.
Yeah.
And now you have this style of a jam band is one genre, this style of a jam band is another genre, this over here is another genre, this is pop punk, this is punk, this is It's not that it's dead. It's, if you accumulate all that together, it's still a huge amount of records.
And then you have genres like emo, where it's not,
again, it's similar to rock. It's the same thing.
It's not even like really a sound. Like, yeah,
that's an attitude, right?
Emo is more of just like a lyrical thing. If it weren't a lyrical thing,
I thought it was a guy liner thing.
Sound thing. I'm just gonna ignore that. then there is no physical way that Modest Mouse and Fallout Boy would be in the same genre.
Right.
Right?
I get it. I totally get it. Correct. So you had a great year. Listen, obviously it was a tough year for the world.
It was a rough year.
But that's the other thing is too. One thing that hip hop artists and pop artists and things like that have been able to do is embrace what's going on in the world. They've had content to discuss. Yes.
And when people say, "Oh, why are musical acts getting all political now?" It's like, what? Yeah. Go back to the '60s where Creedence Clearwater Revival
correct
was making music about checks, notes, politics.
Right. I know a guy one time told me, he's like, I liked the Beatles before they were political, and I thought to myself, you mean before they were adults?
Right?
You know what I mean? I mean, because that's what happened. They became adults, they learned how to play their instruments, and they got political. Of course they did. The world around them is something you look for content to talk about. Once you've talked about kissing a girl 25 times, song 26, maybe you're going to talk about life.
Dude, it blows my mind when people started saying, "Oh, Tom Morello's getting political now."
Oh, that drives me crazy. I had Rage Against the Machine before. Are you kidding me? The name's Rage Against the Machine. What machine were they raging against?
Those who work forces are the same who burned crosses. How are you interpreting that lyric?
Correct. It does. Don't get me wrong. I get it if you just listen and it's okay. Yeah. You don't have to dive deeper into things. It can periodically drive me crazy when people don't absorb the lyrics. Like on a lighter note, your grandmother, my mother, used to sing at weddings quite a bit when I was a child. And I remember going to a wedding and hearing 3 Times a Lady, which is a song about a man dumping. Now that we've come to the end of our rainbow, there's something I must say out loud. Okay, if you're doing that prior to a wedding, that's not a good omen.
I remember.
He's leaving her, bro.
There was a commercial. There was this freaking I don't remember if it's like a Geico or a FedEx commercial.
Go ahead.
But it was a commercial where a dude was humming the White Snake song.
Here I go again on my own, right.
And it was being played at like a wedding. And it's like, that song's about leaving someone.
Right. If you're playing that at a wedding, it better be some form of a shoot.
Dude, you play that at a divorce.
That's a wrestling term, by the way. Yeah. So we had a good time talking about this.
We did. We always have good times talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I love music.
Yeah, this was a good year for music.
It was. Tough year for everybody, good year for music. Yeah. Hopefully we'll spin out of all this mess a little bit better than we were yesterday and continue to. One thing about this year in music is bands couldn't tour, so we wound up getting, if they were working on anything and had been touring for years, they were able to get in the studio and put it out because they just couldn't tour. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to go and stand in front of people and hear loud noises, and that will soothe our souls in a way that things can't. So for my man Ray, and why don't you exit us out? It's your show.
This is my show.
Correct. It is absolutely your show. Thank you to Charles Gibson and the
Gin Project.
Absolutely.
Thanks to KP.
Oh, and his buddy Daniel.
KP.
I'm KP.
And me, Ray.
Go Home Heat Production Copyright 2021.
Go home.